Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Allow me to mention that this study is a joint collaboration of my institution, ZIPA, as well as the UNU-WIDER, so I'm presenting this on behalf of 5 other co-authors. Oh, okay. Great. So a quick overview. I think I will provide some context, but of course, I'd like to thank Alessandra, who's touched on quite a number of issues that build part of what I will talk about, and I will share some of the insights, emerging themes. I will give a snapshot around environmental insurance in Zambia, as well as some concluding remarks that we got from the working paper. So I think something that has been quite clear since we joined this conference is around the Global South facing multiple complex and intersecting crises. I think a session yesterday was titled Polycrisis, if I'm not mistaken. And what becomes important in this context for us is having well-functioning systems that can enable timely responses, especially during shocks. So Zambia, as an example, does show some evolving social protection needs. As mentioned by Alexandra as well, poverty rates currently stand at 60%. The population of the country is about 19.6 million. So you're looking at close to 11 million people living in poverty. And last year, I would say we faced one of the worst droughts in the country, and this affected about 84 of the 115 districts that we have. So this paper, though a working paper, does provide some empirical evidence on some of the needs, opportunities, and challenges for social protection reform as well as expansion during some of these occurrences. So I'll just focus on the 3 questions that we looked at. Of course, by the study title, this is a qualitative study. So we wanted to ask what social protection needs are experienced by local populations, what are the stakeholders' perspectives on some of the most pressing challenges, as well as how can social protection measures and institutions be developed to better respond. In terms of methodology and focus, of course, we did have a documentary analysis of relevant policy documents. We had semi-structured interviews, about 25 of them, with key institutions that I would say are frontline responders, and data was analyzed employing thematic and narrative analysis. So perhaps in terms of some of the insights that we saw, of course, social protection is a key feature of Zambia's policy documents as well as laws. One thing for a fact is that we have recognized social protection in our Bill of Rights, in our Constitution, but unfortunately we still lack the legal backing in terms of having a social protection law. But I'm happy to note that we do have a very new social protection policy that does take a life cycle approach, and we're really looking at protecting individuals all the way from a young age until they get into adulthood. So another key insight that we saw is that our government has shown commitment to expanding and strengthening social protection systems, and we've seen this as well from the budget commitments. So this graph here is just describing some of the programs that we have. Of course, when we go down to the last program, the Social Cash Transfer Program, which is a primary program in our country, you will note that it's financed mostly by government with about 30%, and this does fluctuate, being supported by donors. But of course, an area for attention is water and sanitation that we note has this imbalance, but you will note some of the other programs are fully funded by the government of Zambia. But also, over time, I think what we've seen is the commitment in terms of budget allocation. Of course, this has been prompted by various events. 7.4% of the national budget, some would argue, is still quite small, but for us, I would say this is progress that we have made in expanding and reaching various individuals. In a similar sense, with this graph, you tend to note that some of the programs have grown over time, except for one that has mainly remained quite stagnant. I'll draw your attention to 2025. The top blue bar is actually a new program. It's a cash for work program. So we're looking at providing some temporary employment to individuals who may have been affected by occurrences such as drought. So perhaps one of the other things that came out from our studies is the growing need for integration between programs. So we have seen social cash transfer through the Cash Plus agenda receive complementary services. And one of them is really through the National Health Insurance Scheme, where we're also extending this health coverage to various individuals. So just to speak to some of the programs, and I know this is a bit too wordy, I think I'll just draw your attention to the program and some of the shock responsive elements that we've seen. So with social cash transfer program, one thing we saw is that this supported 1.2 million drought affected households. But during COVID as well, we saw individuals that were receiving about $14 as support. With the farmer security pack, by design, this is one that does consider weather forecasting, as well as flood and drought predictions. We have farmer input support program that also looks at providing some form of climate smart practices in terms of agriculture extension services, but we also have the homegrown school feeding program, where we did see this program being upscaled from early education to secondary education in terms of providing a meal for a child to stay in school while they're faced with crisis. So other aspects that came out from the interactions we had with various stakeholders is women who face particular disadvantages in terms of limited assets and resources, but we also drew attention to mobility issues in terms of individuals that are already faced with pre-existing hurdles in terms of livelihoods. To speak to some of the systemic challenges, I think this was also mentioned in a session earlier, the delayed response. So we had a 6-month delay drought relief gap in terms of funding. So if we're looking at providing the right service at the right time, really 6 months down the line, you would beg to question where someone would be. Other issues that existed were around targeting and data issues. We had people speaking to issues around not having a unified beneficiary database, but also issues of capacity. Another issue that can hinder effective delivery and expansion is informality around the informal economy, but we also highlight issues around the benefit adequacy. So the current benefit or the cash-in-kind grant is 200 kwacha, which is approximately $7 that would go to a family for a period of a month. Some of the issues, just to go straight to the bottom, are new instruments that we've seen emerge is that around climate insurance, and I will share a little bit more around this aspect in line with the session that we are in. So in terms of sharing an environmental insurance snapshot, so there are just 3 areas of focus around scalability and reach, cost benefit and affordability, as well as awareness, trust, and cultural effects. So what we have seen over time, of course, is more insurers now offering climate insurance. Mayfair is named there because they did pioneer this particular aspect. But also in terms of scaling, this is challenged by our vast geography. So Zambia, in terms of size, for those of you familiar with Finland, is on average more than twice the size of Finland. So you tend to note that it's quite remote, so to get to the farmers becomes quite hard. Then another issue that I felt was important for this session is that insurance really isn't culturally embedded unless it's mandated by law. So people are paying car insurance because the cops will catch you once you're on the road, but I guess it's something that still needs quite some sensitization. But another way to get through this is working through aggregators, and these would include some of the seed companies, as well as the microfinancial institutions who may already be working in some of these areas. But also on cost, benefit, and affordability. So farmers' willingness to pay is often mismatched by the benefits that they're expecting. So a farmer generally has one income cycle, and they have so many competing needs at the point that they're getting that particular income. They need to take their children to school, they need to feed their families, among others. So one way to work around this is possibly embedding insurance into some of the products. So it could be a farmer selling grain and you're asking them to leave a portion of their grain to cover them for the next farming season. And another challenge that was actually noticed is that insurance is tied to the input cost. So for example, your input cost is $2,000, for example. If I'm tying my insurance to the input, it's 2,000, and maybe my expected yield is 10,000 kwacha. So really, I will insure against 2,000, and when you give me my payout at the point that I incur that loss, the gap is really seen even just from the example itself. So with the farmer inputs program, for instance, farmers were willing to pay $7, and they were getting a payout of about 37 or 93, between 37 and $93. So the bigger the investment really, in terms of the message itself, the bigger the investment, the higher the payout. And this is where farmers tend to be disgruntled, because remember, they already don't get much, so they would not be willing to pay so much for insurance itself. So public awareness then becomes an area that needs to be improved in terms of building trust. What has worked well are payout ceremonies in some instances when people see a neighbor receiving a benefit, perhaps they would be willing to somewhat get involved. I would say the proof is really in the pudding itself. So once you're seeing that working for somebody else, I think that's something that people would want to get involved in. So I think this slide here is just looking at some of the different actors. Of course, you have government partaking in this, but we've seen international financial corporations through the World Bank providing that support, IFA, the UN system, civil society, but also mobile network operators who tend to support some of these payment methodologies during crisis. So in terms of the paper, really, I won't spend so much time on providing these broad-based policy recommendations that we came across, but some of the issues that we do emphasize, and not just on environmental insurance, but on the social protection in the humanitarian context, is around enhancing domestic financing, strengthening our legal systems, improving coordination, but also leveraging on insurance mechanisms. Perhaps that also is an area that requires a little bit more research in terms of trying to explore further opportunities and the long-term impact of social insurance schemes. So we have models such as the African Risk Capacity, which is a sovereign level insurance that has provided some form of promise. I would say government of Zambia in 2022 paid about $250,000 in terms of a premium, and the payout was over $3 million, which is something that would provide support, especially where you have some of those funding gaps. I don't know how much time I have, but I think I will end here for now.